the most unprofessional thing a medical professional has ever said done to you? Story 1. Doctor couldn't get the speculum in. After a lot of pushing, it finally, painfully slams inside me. The doctor was excited by his achievement and goes, "Atta girl, that's my champ." The nurse looked at him in horror. I busted out laughing. He realizes almost immediately that was very weird and turns completely red and goes, "I'm so sorry. I coach Little League." Story 2. In high school, my mom set me up with a therapist because she thought all teenagers should have someone to talk to about teenage angsty. In the first meeting, he asked about me and why I was there, and I said I was pretty normal. He scoffed and said, "No, you're not. Normal people don't get sent to therapy." I never went back. Story 3. In college, I had to go to the ER because I kept throwing up a lot. A nurse came in and asked me some questions: when did it start, etc. Then she asked if my back hurt. I said it did a bit. She grunted, "Aha," like she knew exactly what was wrong. I was like, "What is it?" She explained I was pregnant. I told her that actually wasn't the case. She said, "You can't really know that." Yes, I can, because I actually know how babies are made. I eventually demanded they run a pregnancy test. Yeah, I wasn't pregnant. Story 4. The dentist I worked for came in to check a patient. Noticed she obviously had breast implants and said to her, "You will be required to disrobe for this exam." The patient was mortified. Story 5. 2 weeks ago, my IUD displaced, resulting in a trip to the ER. The attending nurse asked who the guy was with me who had left to scope out the vending machine for some snacks, and I replied that he was my boyfriend of nearly 6 years. Her response was, "You're 31, not married, and don't have any kids. Who gave you an IUD?" and rolled her eyes. This was at a well-respected hospital in PA. The nurse was younger than I was. Story 6. Not me, my sis-in-law. After her first appointment confirming her pregnancy, DR called sis-in-law's dad to give him the good news. Dad spread the news around. They weren't going to tell anyone for about 2 months. Slight breach, and confidentially. Story 7. About 4 years ago, I fell with a bottle in my hand and cut through all the tendons and nerves from my pinky to the middle finger. The cut was about 6 centimeters long. Anyway, I went to the doctor the next day, and after waiting for 2 hours in the lobby, I went in to see him. He took 3 minutes to examine my hand before telling me to go home and rinse with water and antiseptic. I remember feeling elated by his calm demeanor, and I thought the wound wasn't too serious. I went home and did as he said. A couple of days later, I traveled back home. The Switzerland plane trip was very painful. I took the bandage off when I got home and showed my mom. She went completely ballistic since the wound had gone septic and my fingers were turning blue. I also had no movement or feeling in my pinky, and its neighbor, she rushed me to the ER immediately, where I received 23 stitches in my hand. The severed nerves had to be extended and tied together. The doctor told me I was extremely close to requiring an amputation of all 3 fingers. I later complained to the hospital in Denmark about the doctor, but I probably should have sued. He failed to tell me the severity of my wound-cut tendons and nerves, so I think that qualifies as being extremely unprofessional. To this day, when I clench my fist, my pinky just points straight at its spelling. Story 8. I took my college roommate to the ER after an attempted date rape. A guy from our floor ran into her at a party and disappeared into the kitchen to make her a special drink, which she accepted because she was 18 and naive and believed this guy was her friend. Half an hour later, the RA caught this guy trying to drag her unconscious body into his dorm room. The RA told the guy, "Nope, this isn't happening," picked my roommate up and brought her back to our suite. She was still really messed up the next morning, way more messed up than she should have been after having only 2 drinks the night before, as in, she could barely stay awake. So I brought her to the ER. The doctor couldn't have been ruder or less sympathetic. Rolled his eyes when I explained that Shed only had 2 drinks and said something along the lines of, "You expect me to believe that," heavily implied that Shed deserved what happened to her and that the incident would teach her a lesson about drinking too much. When we asked for a drug test, he refused and went off about how it was a waste of time because less than 1 of people actually test positive for date rape drugs, and he knew that she was just drunk and lying because she regretted going home with this guy. We loaded her into a car and drove her to the hospital 1 town over. She tested positive for Rohypnol. Surprise. Sometimes people are that 1 in 100 case. The story still doesn't have a happy ending, though. When my roommate went to the university with the drug test results, they sat her down for a meeting about how the guy in question would be ruined and lose his football scholarship if she accused him. And was she really sure she wanted to do that? They implied that she had voluntarily taken the drug and that she would get in trouble for violating the school's drug and alcohol policy if she came forward. Her grades tanked, and she barely finished college. I switched my major to psychology later that year, and now I work with rape victims for a living. This incident was 5 years ago, and I'm still mad. Story 9. My old OBGYN First meeting, getting a routine pap smear. Start pap smear. So, I see you work at the local university. What you do? I'm a chemistry professor. Wow, I wish my chemistry professors had looked like you, dude. You're elbow deep in my vagina. Can you not comment on me appearance? Story 10, I got really drunk at a party, fell, and got a huge cut on my head that wouldn't stop bleeding. Went to the hospital, they stapled my head together, and let me rest for about 3 hours. They then handed me a brochure without saying anything and told me I could go. So there I am in the street, completely wasted, in nearly freezing weather. Hailed a cab, and when I got out, I literally fainted in the street. A neighbor asked if I needed to go to a hospital, to which I replied, I just came from the hospital, got help to my apartment, passed out on my bed for about 10 hours. When I wake up, I pull the brochure out of my pocket, which basically says you may have a concussion. It is very important you not be alone for the next 24 hours. Bastards. Edit 1 point ID like to add. Since I had a head injury, they wrapped it up in a bandage before sending me off on my way. If you've ever seen the episode of Faulty Towers where Basil has a concussion, that's how ridiculous I looked passed out on the street. Story 11, I had a dentist tell me that my teeth were hideous and lecture me about what I needed to have done to make them pretty so my husband would be interested in me again. This was while he was working on my teeth. I found another dentist, my teeth are fine, and my husband has always been interested. Story 12, in second grade age 7, I fell off the monkey bars at school and landed on my wrist. I could feel that something was seriously wrong, but the school nurse shrugged it off and sent me to class. I was forced to use the wrist my writing hand for the rest of the day. When my mom came to pick me up, the nurse told her I had been hamming it up all afternoon. Fortunately, my parents have half a brain and saw that it was obviously broken. I had a cast for 3 months, and that nurse didn't look me in the eye for the rest of my elementary school career. Oh. And apparently the break was barely a centimeter from the growth plate. I came within a centimeter of having a 7-year-old's hand for the rest of my life. Would have been a fun bar story. At least, edit this probably would not have happened. But as a worst-case scenario, maybe... Story 13, I've had 2 separate, unrelated therapists fall asleep while I was talking. Because of my work schedule, my therapy appointments would be at the end of the day. Word of the wise, always schedule therapy appointments early in the day. Story 14, I went for a dentist appointment and sat in the reclining chair. Dentist mentioned I have big-sized teeth. Female dental assistant quietly said, she also has big thighs. Dentist assured her. I was a timid teenager, so I didn't say anything. Story 15, my first pelvic exam for a yeast infection. Doctor refuses to do the pelvic because I had told her I was not and had never been active, said I wouldn't be able to handle the speculum. Finally convince her, and she takes a look, comes up yelling about how I lied to her, my hymen was torn, ergo ID had. And that's the story of how I told a medical professional that hymens can tear thanks to many non-situations. Story 16, when my wife was pregnant, we decided not to circumcise our son. When telling our doctor, she tried to change her mind, not by telling us anything medical or health-wise, but because her boyfriend said guys made fun of uncut guys in the locker room. Story 17, I was told that I have cancer over the phone whilst being berated for her not being able to reach me faster. I was sent home from the ER while suffering for a ruptured and necrotic fallopian tube because the doctor was convinced I just had an STD despite negative tests. A week later, I lost half my pelvic organs and an appendix in emergency surgery. Story 18, female walk-in clinic doctor did not want to look at my penis. She took a quick glance at the infected cut on my junk and told me I had an STD for sure. She then scolded me about unprotected. After testing me for everything, I went home without antibiotics, and I was picturing my life with an STD. A few weeks later, I saw a real doctor, and she diagnosed it right away. Her assistant stood in the corner facing the wall because she couldn't handle looking at my penis. TLDR, some female doctors can't handle looking at dicks. Story 19A, friend's wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was getting a consultation for a mastectomy. The doctor told the husband, my friend, that it was a shame because she had some really good. He also told him that he had been a lucky man. Richard about lost his. Story 20, I had a DR order the nurses to give me Elavil after I had specifically refused it. She was convinced that my symptoms were caused by depression and wanted to get it off work. Yes, she actually said that to me. She prescribed Elavil, saying that it helps with pain, and also it will help with your depression, and you'll see. Everything will look brighter. I refused, saying I wasn't depressed, other than my frustration getting a diagnosis. I tried again to convince her that my pain and inability to hold anything down was not a mental-emotional issue. About a week later, I collapsed, ended up in the hospital, and she told the nurses to give me Elavil via 4 and not tell me. I almost immediately started having extreme tremors and what they called pseudo-Parkinsonism. One of the nurses slipped up, or actually stepped up, and told me it was caused by the Elavil. I was furious, as I had said, I did not want to take it. Later on, after going home and several more weeks of constant vomiting, I ended up hypokalemic and completely paralyzed. I was taken by ambulance to another hospital, not in my HMO, and it took them less than a week to find that I had a grapefruit-sized tumor 80 infiltrated from my uterus into my abdominal wall. They sampled it in my lymph nodes and found I had cancer with lymph involvement on both sides. I underwent a hysterectomy, oophorectomy, and my pain magically disappeared, as well as radiation treatment. To this day, though, I have the twitching and tremors as a souvenir. As a bonus, she told me she had been convinced it wasn't cancer, because cancer doesn't hurt. When I saw her again after the surgery, I said something along the line of, well, I guess cancer does hurt after all. Her response was, well, it's not the cancer that hurts, it's the nerves it was compressing. I told her in that case, step over here by the door, and it'll slam your hand in it. The door slamming won't hurt, just the nerves the door compresses will. Sorry for the rant. It still makes me mad. TLDR, doctor sneaks a drug I refused into my 4. Then makes a lame excuse for her misdiagnosis. Edit wrong word. Edit 2. Several have asked. It was back in 2000 that the hospital incident occurred, so it's far too late to sue. I should have done so, for many reasons, but at the time I was just tired and weak and lacked the will to deal with it. I moved away from there a few years later and now have excellent medical care at a different facility. Story 21. While in the hospital being induced with my second child, the labor nurse kept disappearing for long periods of time. ID asked for a yoga ball to sit on. She'd be gone 40 minutes and come back, and every time say, I just keep forgetting about you, or my son brought me some lunch, and then I totally forgot about you. My labor was only 5 hours long. She forgot about me after I requested my epidural, and I started pushing my baby out, alone in a room, with no pain meds on Pitocin. I thought I was going to die. Story 22. Does the school nurse count as a medical professional? My school nurse started refusing to see me because she decided I was faking my symptoms to get out of school, since they were so frequent. Look, I get it. I had a lot of stomach issues, and they're easy to fake, without a lot of symptoms outside of pain. I wasn't faking. The stomach aches were the result of stress and anxiety, but they're besides the point. One day during recess, I fell and cut my arm open real bad. I was sent down to the nurse. My arm was wrapped up in a towel, so I wouldn't bleed over everything, so the cut wasn't visible at the moment. She sees me approaching, doesn't even let me explain while I'm there before snapping at me to go back to class. I go back to class. Teacher sees me still bleeding potentially to death and has to meet down to the nurse to get my arm checked out. Mom was called, and I did get out of school that day. Nussy, when I was in second grade, I jumped off a slide at recess, and when I landed, my knees came up and hit my mouth, loosening a few baby teeth. The nurse called my mother, and she took me to the dentist. The dentist got me situated in the chair and told me, don't worry, I'm just going to squeeze your front teeth to check them, and then proceeded to abruptly out my 2 top front teeth with no anesthesia. It hurt like and scared the out of me and initiated a 39-year hatred of dentists and dental procedures. UDR, Paul C. A psychiatrist told me I only identified as a lesbian because I wasn't attractive to men, and that it would change if I put more effort into my appearance. I got a new psychiatrist pretty quickly after that, and am still a lesbian. Story 23. Went to a walk-in clinic for a rash. At the time, I had a black eye from playing rugby. The old white South African doctor asked me how I got it. I told him rugby, and he said, oh, we used to play that when I was in school. Brutal game. Too many Kafirs playing now, in my opinion. I had no idea what he was talking about until I told some of the guys on my team, and they were pretty offended. Also, he gave me a 30-day prescription of Percocet to treat my rash. He maybe shouldn't have been practicing anymore. Story 24. I snapped my banjo string whilst having with my now wife. Then GF. We didn't know what had happened at the time, but there were spurts of blood, so we headed down to A&E. When the nurse called me through to be seen, my wife didn't follow me through, and she, along with the doctor, gave each other a wry look, said, are you on your own? And had a laugh at my expense. They laughed their way through the examination, too. Fair play, I suppose, although at the time I did think I was broken, so I wasn't seeing the lighter side. Edit. Not a real banjo. Don't know on the word for it. Neither did the doctors, but it is the bit that holds the foreskin in place. Edit 2F, RENELUM. Story 25. My GP, when I was in high school, told me my big toenails were falling off because of my marching band shoes played pit percussion, sodded at march. That I was passing out on stage in rehearsals due to stage fright, which I was adamant about not having. Having performed all my life, turned out I had a congenital heart defect that almost killed me a few years later. That she wouldn't give me birth control, even though I was 18, because of marriage Jesus that I ended up spending most of my 20s in hospital because this quack was so bad at her job at its spelling. Story 26. I had a swollen lymph node in my groin. Doctor said it was because I was going against God's will by shaving my vagina. Having a furry didn't solve my problem. Story 27, I thought I had strep throat, felt like in general, and could see white patches on the back of my throat. Went to my doctor's and had to see the PA. He accused me of pill shopping and said come back in a week. Yeah, pill shopping for antibiotics. Came back in a week with lymph nodes the size of golf and definitely had strep throat for the past week. I refused to pay the bill from the PA visit and filed a complaint on the PA. Story 28, not to me, but someone I know went to an oncologist because they thought she might have cancer. I have good news. Your test results are back, and you do not have cancer. Congratulations. A week later, she gets a call to schedule her first round of chemo. She says there must be some mistake. The doctor said I was cancer-free. Lady on the phone gets real uncomfortable and says, I have an order here from that doctor that you are to begin chemotherapy. So you better call his office to straighten this out. And perhaps contact a lawyer. She does, and it turns out that all her charts showed she had cancer. The doctor knew it, but simply lied about it, because he didn't like to deliver bad news. After investigating, they discover several other patients who went through exactly the same ordeal. Her chemo and lawsuit are both pending. Story 29, had an emergency C-section with my first child. At the time, this required a 4-day hospital stay. Every day, the hospital pediatrician came into the room and said, you still here? Why don't you go home? And other comments to indicate I was some kind of gold-bricking rather than a patient after major surgery. Still don't know what was wrong with this idiot. Was it his idea of a joke? Anywho, when the purge comes, this is on my list. Next time I'll tell about the radiologist who told me I had breast cancer the day before Christmas a few years ago. Happy holiday. P.S. I didn't have cancer. My mom and I share a name. And for a brief time, the same doc. I was concerned that I might have breast cancer and scheduled a biopsy. My mom's appointment was earlier in the week. He mixed up our info and asked Mom about her concerns about breast cancer. When he realized his mistake, he didn't cover by pretending it was another patient. Nope, he shared all my info. That was an enjoyable phone call I received from Mom. So, pissed, when I confronted him, he laughed it off. I laughed it off when I reported him. Thankfully, no cancer. I went in to see my gyno because I needed my birth control prescription renewed. I was 18 and had just become active. She came in and scolded me for having with someone I wasn't married to, and that he doesn't love me, and was just using me, that I would end up pregnant and alone, etc., etc. I paid her no mind, but made a mental note from then on that I would not see her for my appointments. When I went to the pharmacy for my prescription, they said the office had never sent it. I called a million times, went into the office, and each time it was some bullshit excuse about why it wasn't sent. Turns out she did the same thing to a classmate of mine. I firmly believe she didn't send my prescription on purpose, like she was trying to teach me a lesson. Safe to say I switched doctors immediately after. P.S. I've now been with that same boyfriend for almost 4 years, and the premarital is fantastic. You Mary Jane? Military doc said I was taking advantage of the system for a previously diagnosed condition, was continuously derisive during the checkup, reported the situation, no repercussions. But the staff medics told me he really wasn't and facilitated me seeing someone different. Switch docs got treatment. Story 30, when I was 10, dermatologist asked if I wanted a painkiller after burning a massive ingrown wart under my heel. As I just had suffered the burning, putting my socks back was a relief, so I declined the offer, but then just 1 minute later, I told my mom that the pain was insufferable and that I would take the painkiller. She asked him, and this piece of replied something like she should know what she wants. Dude, you burn me. I am 10, a bit shocked. Can't you understand that I might make a mistake? Story 31, if you come in here complaining about your stomach one more time, the only thing I'm going to give you is Xanax, so you will calm down and stop thinking you have a problem when you don't. Doctor 1, before Doctor 2 discovered I had a parasite in my intestines, presumed to be from bad sushi. Story 32, when I first got insurance through my husband, I had to find a new doctor. I had an ear infection and went to see random new doctor on insurance. Now, I frequently have ear infections, so it's usually in and out. Doc looks at my ear, clucks, and gives me a prescription. This doctor about my symptoms, and I tell her. Instead of looking in my ear, she starts asking me other questions. Well, are you nauseous right now? No, are you ever nauseous? Well, yeah, occasionally. Oh, honey, I can't prescribe you anything cause you're pregnant. That's why you're nauseous. Now, don't even take any pain meds or you'll hurt the baby. So I found myself back in my car with orders for a blood pregnancy test and an anxiety attack. During the whole appointment, the doctor never even looked at my ear or did anything else except ask about nausea. After I calmed down, I ditched the test orders and went to urgent care where, surprise, I had an ear infection. Never went back to that doctor, but did get a call months later asking if I'd done the pregnancy test and to come back for prenatal care. Over 10 years later, still not pregnant. Story 33, my son's pediatrician told me that he was getting sick too often at daycare and that if I really cared, I'd do what's best for him and keep him home rather than let him be cared for and taught by strangers. It was his first ever ear infection. I cried in the parking lot and then changed doctors. Story 34, I had rectal cancer and had a temporary ostomy loop ileostomy, to be more precise, meaning it was higher up than a colostomy and with much pastier output. After 2 weeks, I had what is called a mucocutaneous separation where the ostomy pulls away from the skin, and it scared me. I thought I'd be able to see my intestines writhing around in there. Turns out to be no big deal, but I get a call from the hospital to follow up, and the nurse asked me how I was doing, and I described what happened, and this nurse started going on about how disgusting ostomies are, and the smell, and having a look at it, it was actually pretty funny, but by no stretch what I expected from a pro. Story 35, I was informed by an absolute genius that my depression wasn't severe after all, and I just needed to try harder to succeed in school. I was 17 and had just left a mental hospital after failing 2 consecutive grades due to depression and was catatonic upon admittance to the hospital. On the plus side, I looked him up, and he seems to be unable to find work as a clinical psychologist. Story 36, when I was in my 20s, I was getting a ton of blood taken to rule out a bunch of diseases, and zero in on the horrible one I knew I was eventually DX with. So I was a mess from that weighing on my mind. Add to it, I am severely phobic of getting my blood taken and was a crying mess. Now, the phlebotomist didn't know what I had been through or what was going on with me. I looked perfectly healthy, right? Just a drama queen, I guess she thought. She was so incredibly rude to me. She told me how her brother had just died from Lou Gehrig's, and I had no right to be crying, and basically called me a loser. Like, some people might be able to toughen up a little, but I was not that person on that day. At that point, I got angry and told her I hated her. Hello. Well, that did not go well for me either, because she launched in a verbal beatdown whilst taking 9 vials of blood from me. It was just a really bad experience for me. Not as bad as some of these, but it was really unprofessional and did zero to help with my blood phobia. Story 37, went into an urgent care because I had a sore throat. The doctor took a look at me and said, well, it's probably strep, but it could be HIV. You'll prescribe some penicillin, but if it doesn't clear up, come back and see me. Really, dude? I get it. I'm in college. You don't need to scare me into safe by trying to make me worry that something super common could be a potentially life-threatening illness. That's what WebMD is for. Story 38, I attempted suicide, and even though my family asked that they leave me in a psych ward, they sent me home. I was fine, but there are plenty of people who wouldn't be. Story 39, had a doctor tell me that the spot of blood pooling on the side of my leg was probably nothing, and that if I was worried about it, I should take a picture once a month and chart how much bigger it was getting. A short while later, the varicose vein in my leg that was causing the spot burst as I was stepping out of the shower, sending a 3-foot stream of blood shooting across the bathroom floor. It looked like a murder scene in my bathroom when the paramedics arrived. I had stopped the bleeding by then, take a first aid course, folks, but went to the ER anyway, who couldn't do anything for it since I stopped the bleeding anyway. Saw a vein specialist who closed off some veins around the site and haven't had an issue with it since, but definitely need to have that vein removed completely. Story 40, spent 2 years going to and from monthly or weekly doctor's visits for multiple specialists and my GP. Due to multiple car accidents, I have diagnosed spinal damage, TMJ, fibromyalgia, and chronic pain. During a visit, I joked that I see her and my other doctors more often than my own mother. She looked at me and said, wow, really, that's really sad, in the most judgy, goddamn voice ever. So I said, yeah, I can't leave my house or drive most days. I literally save up my strength for doctor's apps and spinal shots for the SPI I'll damage. And then she looked down her nose at me and said, what? Spinal damage? Are you sure? I was very sure, as she had recommended me to most of the specialists I was seeing, including a psychiatrist for my depression, for my chronic pain. I ended up switching doctors literally that day. Best decision I ever made. Story 41, is it really that bad? Minutes after my mother died, I was crying my eyes out right outside the room she was still in. I would have punched if I weren't so shocked and distraught. Story 42, when I was 14, I went to the dermatologist for acne, and they wanted me to get on a medication that was very harsh on the body and would require a blood test each month to make sure my liver was fine. I said I was unsure if I wanted to take it because of the side effects. She told me, well, then you'll just be ugly for the rest of your life. I left in tears. Story 43, well, there's nothing in your eye because I can't see it, so you're imagining it, and there's nothing I can do. Med intern says, no, wait, I want to try again. Proceed to find a broken contact lens that tore up my eyes so bad. I thought it had liquefied, it hadn't. I wanted to hug that intern. People like her are what medicine needs. I knew that lens was in there. You Violet hung. I hope you get sued. I needed my doctor to recommend a specialist. She wasn't there, so I saw someone else at the practice. The first thing he did when he walked in was stroke the length of my thigh while I sat on the exam table. When I asked about the recommendation, he just Googled the type of specialist in the area. Then he could not figure out how to print from Google Maps and kept running back and forth to the printer. I left and found my own specialist. Then there was the doctor who told me my own medical history I was telling him was wrong. He didn't have any records, but of course I don't know what happened to me. Recently, one of my doctors wanted to start me on the only medication to cause me a severe allergic reaction. I know it is listed in my file. My mom said her doctor did the same thing for a topical cream. Thank goodness she patch tested it and checked the ingredients. Story 44 probably will get buried. Physician, you're R. Fergum's grandmother. No kidding, he just asked for an HIV test. You know he's gay, right? This was 1996. Story 45, when I was 12, my dentist told my parents within earshot of MedHat I had the worst overbite head ever seen. My father was in graduate school and couldn't afford to give me braces. Over 20 years later, I've never forgotten it, and it's the reason I rarely smile in photos. Story 46, my gorgeous sister has Bell's palsy and is a little slow on the uptake. She was 18 and getting 6 stitches under her eyebrow after catching a softball with her eye socket during a bullying incident at church over Mormon. I asked the doctor if there would be much of scar. He said, well, I could use the smaller thread to make sure there won't be any scar, but it's not like she's a model or anything. Edit, she still have a visible 2-inch scar. 21 years later, so if he was trying to be funny because he was such an awesome doctor, he didn't succeed at the awesome part. Unrelated, but due to her hair, her nickname was Einstein at high school. It kind of is now and really works with the scar. Story 47, I told my school nurse that I was bulimic for 5 years, and I wanted to stop. She was very supportive and kind, which was great because she was the first person that I told. She told me to come back the next day during my spare to talk about what to do next. I was walking up the stairs to see her when I heard her talking to a teacher that I didn't know about me. They were gossiping about me and discussing why I would even want to tell the nurse. In retrospect, I shouldn't have. It was crushing. Story 48, there's been a couple, but this one was outrageous. ID, had a stomach virus for 4 days and could barely keep anything down. Nurse randomly asked if I've been taking my bipolar meds. And I said no, because it would be a huge waste of money since I was throwing up, but I assured her I was fine. Documents say I have history of hallucinations. She gets visibly nervous, and her voice goes high when she asks if I have any problems. Because of it, I say I've had a few very mild hallucinations, but nothing like I've had in the past. She proceeds to excuse herself, go into the hallway, and freak me out loudly to the doc and other nurses, saying my full name where other patients could hear. I immediately jump up and run to the door and tell her to please shut up and stop breaking HIPAA, and that I'm not that crazy for her to be losing her mind over 4 days without Seroquel. Story 49, I've been in the hospital once or twice every month for the previous 7 months. I've known about my disease since birth, so 23 years. I go in because my stats aren't normal and breathing is worse. It was nighttime, so I go through here. They say I have pneumonia. A couple days into the stay, a pulm doctor who works with my CF doctor comes into my room and proceeds to tell me that I have CF, explains what it is to me. I'm in shock that this dude has the audacity to tell me this like it's groundbreaking news. Then tells me that CF patients have 4 antibiotics, gets PSCC, and do treatment at home. Do you know what that is? Yeah, if you look at my arms that have multiple PCC scars on them, and that I have 4 antibiotics going through me as he speaks, my nurse was in the room to swap out the antis. She turned around and told him to stop. She knows more about CF than you. And if she wanted to open up a unit, she could. He said, oh, good. And asked if I had any questions. Am I here because of pneumonia? If so, how bad? Or because one of my suedos flared? I don't know. I didn't look at your chart before I came in. Get out. Story 50, I can't really remember this, but my parents told me about it. Apparently, I was super hyper as a kid, and one day, I was being really lethargic. So my mother brought me to the local doctor. He gave me a quick look over and said, nah, he's grand. When I got home, my father was back from work and was like, no, there's something wrong with Yashiauditor. Brought me back to the doctor, and after arguing with the doctor for 20 minutes, the doctor got and said, fine, bring him to the hospital, and wrote a letter for my father to bring with him to the hospital. My father got a look at the letter later, and it was this big passive-aggressive rant that basically went, ugh, sorry, you have to deal with these pushy parents. Meanwhile, as soon as I got to the hospital, they were like, oh, this kid's got pneumonia. The doctor still never apologized for the record. Story 51, my gynecologist sent me a check. I'd been seeing him for maybe 3 years, so a few visits, no unprofessional behavior at all. But that last visit was really out of character. He complimented my eyes and my grooming. I paid with a check for $123 when leaving, as usual. A few days later, I received in the mail both my check ID, given at the office, and a check for $250 with a smiley face in the notes section. It was very uncomfortable. I never went back.